Hello, hello. So we are back. We are live. We got quite a bit to talk about here today. So, um, yeah, we got quite a few stories. This shouldn't be a particularly long live stream, but at the same time, these stories are pretty important. And so the first one, of course, is the elephant in the room, the absolute landslide at the Iowa caucus yesterday. So as we can see here, Trump got 51% of the vote, 30 points ahead of second place with nearly 2.5 times as many votes, and that's just among Republican candidates. Okay, just among Republican candidates. So imagine what's going to happen when DeSantis and Nikki Haley are not in the running and more of those votes come in for Trump. I mean, this is the point where we should start to expect major media hysteria. They've already been, running certain slanderous stories and fear mongering and all of that, but this is when we should really expect to see it ramp up, because this is when they're going to start to realize that Trump is a very serious candidate in 2024, and the American people feel that way. And so this is the point also where, just like we saw with the 2020 election, where optics are going out the window. The way that things look now, just they don't matter anymore. They won't care how any of what they say or what they do actually looks, as long as they get a very strong and very visceral emotional reaction from people. In fact, a network of public interest groups and lawmakers nervous about former President Trump's potential return to power are quietly devising plans to foil any effort on his part to pressure the U.S. military to carry out his political agenda. Okay, so it's pretty wild to me that they are openly admitting to planning a military coup if Americans reelect Trump. Because that's really what this is it's subverting authority. It's telling the military to not listen to Trump, even though he was the first president in quite a while to start no new wars and to actually end wars. Like that's pretty unheard of. But of course, the military industrial complex doesn't like that. Boeing, Lockheed, Raytheon, Halliburton, they're not fans of that. And the oil industry is not a fan of that. The deep state's not a fan of that. The CIA is not a fan of that, which of course the CIA is included in the deep state. But it's just wild, again, that they're openly admitting to planning a military coup if Americans reelect Trump. But it's all to protect democracy, of course, right? It's all to protect democracy. But when we talk about a coup, let's remember that Rep. Clay Higgins from Louisiana recently asked FBI Director Christopher Wray if he had confidential human sources inside the Capitol on January 6th dressed as Trump supporters, and Wray couldn't deny it. Wray tried to say, you should not read into my decision not to share information on confidential human sources. But this should be an easy no without having to share any information about confidential human sources. Higgins said there's at least 200 FBI assets who are undercover at the Capitol, directing people and helping them navigate the building. So this seems like a very wild claim until you realize that you start to see some of the footage from the Capitol, and you realize that the same people who are leading the way and the same people who are showing up at every major scene and stirring up the violence, and it's all the same people. Like, there's no way that someone who doesn't have an extensive knowledge of the Capitol layout could navigate it so flawlessly. And so when you start to piece all of those things together, you see that that's not too far-fetched. And again, those massive Capitol doors had to be opened from the inside. So who opened the doors and let them in? It's worth thinking about. And just going back a few months here, going back a few months after the Capitol incident, Christopher Wray was talking about the FBI infiltrating certain extremist groups. And of course, he doesn't mean Black Lives Matter. He doesn't mean Antifa, but he means the Proud Boys, the Three Percenters, the Oath Keepers, basically groups that have never burned down a city. That's who he means. But the court documents for January 6th reference unindicted co-conspirators. So Why are they unindicted when there are over 1,100 people who have been arrested so far? Because federal agents wouldn't be indicted for going undercover. And since they were undercover, it raises a few questions. Like, if they knew about the riot, why didn't they stop it? And if they didn't know about the riot, then what were they really doing there? And the best case scenario to come from this is that the government knew about the potential for violence and did nothing. That's best case scenario for them, for their optics. But if these unindicted co-conspirators are who we think they could be, it could be a much worse scenario for the FBI and the public image. Could be a much worse scenario for the deep state in the public image of the intelligence community in general. But keep in mind, there's certainly a reason that the FBI is refusing to release documents and security footage that would clear up a lot of questions. They're refusing to release these things because doing so would expose the existence and possibly the identity of federal agents who were present. I mean, one thing that I remember talking about quite a bit during this time was the plot to kidnap Governor Whitmer. I think it was in Michigan. Okay, let's not forget that plot, because the Fed's involvement with the kidnapping plot seems to have many eerie similarities to the Capitol siege. The kidnapping plot even started out as a plan to storm the Michigan State Capitol. In the FBI affidavit, they acknowledge using undercover informants in the group and looking into the background of those who were the non-informants of the group. It hardly makes sense that these people would have planned everything out. They weren't exactly the leader type, judging by their resume. And the affidavit even proves that at every level of the plot, FBI informants played the most important leadership roles. FBI informants actually comprised 26% of the plotters in this kidnap plot, leading the charge at every major point. And this was eerily similar to what happened at the Capitol. So when we talk about a coup, it's not like that's something that's new. It's not like that's something that's unheard of. It's not like it's something that hasn't been on people's minds already. So it's worth talking about. It's worth getting it out in the open because, I mean, it's really because of this article here. A network, public interest groups, and lawmakers. They're quietly devising plans to foil any effort on Trump's part to pressure the U.S. military to carry out his political agenda. And they act like his political agenda is going to be to lock up political prisoners or start exterminating people in the streets. And it's like, no, that's a lot closer to what is largely happening now with censorship, political prisoners, and I mean, just look at the January 6th political prisoners, like people who were nonviolent, who were in a riot that was instigated by the FBI. I mean, it is pretty insane to me that we're living in a country that has such a backwards view of what's going on, what reality is. But that's exactly what the media and the deep state are trying to cultivate in the masses. That's their whole point. And so something that we talked about in the last live stream that I think is certainly worth talking about again in this live stream is a cyberattack, because something that has recently come to my attention is that FEMA is training people for a few major events at roundtable simulations. One is mass shooter events, but another is national cyber attacks and blackouts. In fact, it was only in November 2023, so this past November, that we saw the release of the first ever cyber incidents planning guide for emergency managers. So couple this with a statement from Klaus Schwab, and we see here that he says, "We all know but still pay insufficient attention to the frightening scenario of a comprehensive cyber attack, which would bring a complete halt to the power supply, transportation, hospital services, our society as a whole. We have seen in the past few months, for example, ransomware attacks targeting hospitals, critical infrastructure, school systems, the power grid, and many other essential services." And again, this was from 2021. So this isn't super recent, but this is still Klaus Schwab. So this year, which is, of course, 2021, Schwab followed up on his frightening scenario by highlighting the recent ransomware attacks that have struck critical infrastructures around the world in 2021. Says the implication is clear. A lack of cybersecurity has become a clear and immediate danger to our society worldwide. So, he goes on to say, we have seen in the past few months, for example, ransomware attacks targeting hospitals, critical infrastructure, school systems, the power grid, many other essential services. Citizens are impacted by energy shortages, delayed medical treatment, and other effects this new breed of audacious cyber attacks causes. Citizens feeling the repercussions, they're impacted by energy shortages, not a problem that's easily solved. This highlights the need for a structured, multi-stakeholder, multilateral approach to secure our society against them. Okay, so what we're seeing here is that this is them basically painting it out where, okay, here's this massive problem that the grid is open to, that the infrastructure of our Western world that we so enjoy is open to, and it's the government who's going to solve this problem for you. It's the government who's going to solve this problem. And so this is why we need more money and more power. And they're at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland right now. We already know that they're still, okay, so that article was from 2021 when Klaus Schwab said that. We know that they are still downplaying the severity of a cyber attack. I talked about this list at length in my previous live stream, so you can watch that if you want more on this. But basically, we can see the greatest threats to the globe in the next 2 years and the next 10 years as ranked by the World Economic Forum. So we can see in the next 2 years, cyber insecurity, which would be like a cyber attack, is 4th place in the next 2 years. So what's above that? Misinformation and disinformation, extreme weather events, and societal polarization. Okay, I've been through this at length. I don't need to belabor this point anymore, but they're still downplaying it. Like we heard Klaus Schwab from 2021 make it sound like this is the biggest threat to society, and that certainly I think is the case. Like when we look at this list, misinformation and disinformation, you know what? I'm not going to go through it again. I'm not going through the whole thing, but you can look at this list and know that it's really a pretty trash list. It's not extensive. It's really just trying to get people fearful and people to bow down and praise the government. That's basically what that list is doing. Now, the last thing that I really want to dive into today is this very interesting story. The fact that airmen have received a critical airspace warning explaining that the area surrounding the Marshall Islands is a hazardous area with a potential for loss of life due to extreme radiation. So let's pair this with the fact that the area was found to be ideal for the U.S. military to test nuclear bombs back in the 1940s. And it certainly seems like they're testing again. You can see there highlighted Bikini Atoll, Marshall Islands. Okay? The largest nuclear test explosion conducted by the United States was a 15 megaton device tested at Bikini Atoll, Marshall Islands. So when you see pictures of the mushroom clouds, that's where it is more often than not, is the Marshall Islands. So when we look at, global tensions right now, what's going on in the world, China, Iran, Russia, the United States, Israel, all of it, it makes sense that they're testing nukes again. And again, this is no joke. Like, this is sent out to airmen, telling them that there is extreme radiation that can cause loss of life around the Marshall Islands. Okay? So then when we pair this with a fresh round of airstrikes in Yemen, the massive protests all across Yemen where they're chanting death to America, Iran seizing oil tankers, and China supporting Iran, not to mention that the super wealthy are building underground bunkers, something seems to be lining up here between global tensions and the fact that we know in the last days of humanity, we will be lawless at heart and morally corrupt. We know armies will surround Jerusalem. And when they say peace and security, then destruction will come. Well, the focus of the UN is to establish global peace and security, which is emphasized by their statue, oddly resembling the beast from Revelation 13, called, this statue is called Guardian for International Peace and Security, and the fact that the UN General Assembly called for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza amidst what they're calling Israel's relentless assault on Gaza. So without really belaboring this point, okay, because I could talk about this for the next hour, that's a short-sighted assessment at best from the UN right here. Short-sighted assessment at best. And at worst, it's a malevolent tactic to neuter Israel so that they can be conquered by their enemies. We know that a ceasefire really just means Israel can't defend themselves anymore. So it seems that the super wealthy are entering the caves of the rocks and the holes of the ground. It also seems like armies coming against Israel is not exactly out of the question at all, especially when 153 countries in the UN are pretending that Israel is the problem. So now when they defend themselves and they seek to remove the threat, it won't be accepted. So turn to Christ and be saved. This isn't a time to pitter-patter around the issues. Start prepping and start praying. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. I'm enjoying doing these streams. It's kind of erratic. It's whenever I can really get to it, but I'm still enjoying getting back into this and sharing the news with you guys that I see and connect the dots that need to be connected. So thank you guys so much for tuning in. I really appreciate it. I'm going to get a more dedicated setup here at some point. I know this is kind of janky right now. I'm going to get something more consistent here, and we'll be doing this hopefully more regularly in the coming weeks. So thank you guys so much for tuning in. God bless all of you, and I'll see you guys in the next one.